Hello everyone, and welcome to the first online Women of the World Festival in Pakistan. My name is Dana and I'm the British Council's Director Arts in South Asia, and it's my great privilege to welcome you here today on behalf of all of the partners and everybody taking part. Since our very first WOW in Pakistan in 2016, we've come a long way, and our work with the WOW Foundation has grown. And I'm pleased to say that this is the 10th Women of the World Festival in South Asia that we're launching today. WOW Karachi in 2016 inspired us not just to present more festivals in Pakistan, but also in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, Nepal, and now in Turkey. We are presenting WOW Pakistan a year into the COVID crisis, where we know that women and girls have been disproportionately disadvantaged, and we want to provide a space over the next few days where we can really focus on reclaiming the future and working on challenges together, taking ownership of these and trying to design a more positive post-pandemic world. Over the next 4 days, over 100 participants will take part in the public programme for WOW Online in Pakistan. Both men and women will be participating in a series of workshops, talks, online performances and showcasing of the arts. We hope that there will be a lot of fun along the way, and we're involving performers and participants from not just across Pakistan and the UK, but also around the world. Being online means that we're able to invite people to participate and join the conversation, not just in Pakistan, but around the world, and that we can connect in with the global movement for gender equality. Today's talks and discussions will be in multiple languages, and we will also be adding interpretation and audio captions in Pakistan Sign Language for all of our discussion programme. You'll shortly be hearing from Jude Kelly, the founder of the WOW Foundation, and I'm looking forward to the opening keynote by Senator Sherry Rehman. I do hope you'll stay with us over the next few days and enjoy the programme that we have planned for you. We wrap up on the 8th of March, which is International Women's Day, with a very special conversation about the importance of girls' education. This will be moderated by the CEO of the British Council, Kate Biggs, and will be featuring somebody who needs no introduction, Malala Yousafzai and Dr. Maliha Khan from the Malala Fund. I'm really proud that after a long history in my own organisation, the CEO, the chair and the deputy chair are all roles currently held by women, and you'll get a chance to meet all of them over the coming days as they're all participating in WOW Pakistan. I'd like to say a heartfelt thank you to Jude, to Domino and everyone at the WOW Foundation for your ongoing partnership, which we hugely value, and to my own team at the British Council for working so tirelessly and thoughtfully with our curators and our technical team to bring all of this together. A special thanks to Olomopolo and to the Entrepreneurship and Community Development Institute, and to everyone who's made WOW Pakistan 2021 possible, the artists, the organisations and the inspiring individuals who believe gender equality is possible and who are working to make a better post-pandemic future. Have a brilliant WOW, everyone.
Hello everybody, I'm Jude Kelly. I founded the WOW movement 11 years ago now, and I did it because I felt so strongly that girls and women, trans and non-binary, needed to feel that we were capable of having an equal world, even though we'd never seen one. We couldn't touch and feel it yet, but it had to be a tantalizing possibility that we were prepared to fight for in order to realize our talent, realize our potential, and also stop so much of the pain that's caused through injustice. So 11 years on, we have so many WOW festivals right across the world. And the WOW Foundation as a charity is really driving forward, building a movement of people like us, like yourselves, who are excited and thrilled by all the evidence of change that's happened in the last century, before that too, but feeling that we could accelerate that if we just came together, fully intersectional, fully understanding of each other's needs, of each other's stories, of each other's triumphs, as well as our tragedies, and said we can put this shared knowledge to good purpose by bit by bit by bit, changing the world for everyone. So several years ago, the WOW movement began its series of festivals in Pakistan. And that was such a joyful experience for me personally. Many of my friends are from Pakistan and the diaspora, that's the UK. I now have many friends in Pakistan. And as a white woman, obviously, my role is to constantly unlearn ideas about what the world looked like when I was growing up, and relearn and newly learn ideas about our shared space. That's really why I called it Women of the World, unless we understand right across the world how our experiences lend each other knowledge, then we'll only be looking from one viewpoint. And the WOW in Pakistan has been fantastic. The relationship with the British Council throughout, the sense that it's not just about city life, but it's about rural life. The women from Hunza who informed all of us so clearly about what agricultural change and women's labor could look like with new possibilities. All of this has been fantastic. And this theme this year in Pakistan, Unmasked, goes to the very heart, I think, of many of the things that women around the world are feeling, that they want to be revealed to themselves. They want a chance to understand their own dreams, to dare to dream, to have permission to dream. And they also want to take away the mask that you all often have in front of you, which is the one where you pretend that things haven't happened. You shield people from the knowledge of some of your worst experiences because of shame, because of the ideas that you're not allowed to talk about things. With WOW, we celebrate openness, we celebrate vulnerability, we celebrate the fact that actually once we talk about things, then we can realize that we're not alone and we can make change happen. So WOW in Pakistan this year, even though it's online and we can't hug each other, we can't watch each other dancing in real life, we can't hear each other's voices in real life, live, in with our physical space shared. Nevertheless, it's a very exciting and wonderful program. So I'm very proud that we're all part of it together. You should know that at the same time as WOW in Pakistan is happening, we also have WOW in Istanbul, the first WOW in Turkey. And we have WOW in New York at the Apollo Theatre, where Black women from America speak out about the changes they want to see. And that's their fourth WOW. We also have WOW in Bangladesh having their think-ins, and we have WOW in Taiwan having their think-ins. We have WOW in Australia. We have WOW in Brazil. We have WOW in Nepal. So you can see that it is a worldwide movement. And as women tune in all over the world to hear about changes that are exciting, hear about propositions that previously they could never have imagined, then you know that we can strengthen our arm together. I think that we across the world are very unhelpfully guided to think about each other through conventional media. And the way that the geopolitics of the world presents itself to us, we tend to be watching a world's economy from a very particular position, or watching at the moment COVID from a very particular position. And we fail to tell all the stories of triumph, of resilience, of determination that so many of our girls and women are able to tell us about when we give them the platform. So WOW is essentially a place to tell stories to each other, not to favor the most powerful, but to favor the richness of experience, that belongs within our communities at grassroots level. We want everybody to feel that WOW is there to demonstrate not just equality along gender lines, but equality around class lines, around caste lines, around the things that make us feel that we should be separate when actually, as humans, we should be together. COVID has really taken its toll on girls and women specifically. When girls and boys have missed education, in many countries, it's felt as if it was a problem for boys and not necessarily such a big deal for girls. And of course, that's not true. The idea that homeschooling and domestic work will automatically be taken on by the woman, not the man, is too often the case. Although, of course, there are many brilliant men sharing the load. Many women have found it extremely difficult to hold down their jobs and deal with their domestic responsibilities. And of course, the digital divide has been something that's been exposed in this time. Women are very often less able to access the platform in their house because everybody else has the first use of it. So COVID makes us realize that for all of us, liberation, if you like, the chance to be equal, is very dependent on a cultural idea that men and women need to share domestic labor, men and women need to share parenting, that we need to solve issues to do with childcare generally around work. And none of that has been tackled at a fundamental level yet. So another job for all of us at WOW, hey? But the main thing that's come out of it for me as well during these COVID times is that women are absolutely determined and resilient, and that we are able together, because this is the first global experience we've had, a global crisis together. Women, therefore, together are able to say, we have to have change, and we'll make that change together. We'll make intersectional change. We'll understand whether you're talking about the women at the Apollo who have just recently drawn breath again because they have a new president, and Kamala Harris, the first Black woman vice president in the USA, that has lit a beacon of hope in their hearts. Or whether you're talking about WOW in Pakistan, as you're just about to go forward, talking about how to take the mask off. Too many issues where silence has prevailed. So it's a pivotal moment for women financially, pivotal moment for women in terms of health, in terms of mental resources, and in terms of demanding change. So have a wonderful WOW in Pakistan. I'll be watching it, as will so many of my other WOW friends and colleagues from around the world. And what a thrill it is to feel that the theme of healing, of resilience, of change making, of unmasking, of being real, of being open, of being honest, that's something that WOW in Pakistan is leading with as a theme. We'll pick it up and carry it right around the world, I can promise you. So from me, Jude Kelly, to all of you, thank you so much for giving us all these ideas and thoughts and vivacity, and have a wonderful festival.
Good afternoon. British Council, WOW Foundation, curators, activists, performers, and all the participating organizations in this incredible WOW festival that takes place every year. Welcome and thank you for having me. It's an honor for me, again, to be here at the opening of the WOW festival, which has always showcased strong women who have led the battle against patriarchy and its daily oppressions. But thank you also for creating platforms where women who actually need structural change can build alliances. Thank you also for not letting WOW become just a celebration of personal stories, but an important convening of women across the board, while curating an inclusive space where women can identify fresh challenges and address old ones, and also reboot our moral imagination to see where our rights are going. The unmasking at this point of predations, whether it is the pandemic or patriarchy, and frankly, very often a nasty combination of both, is what International Women's Day right now should be about. And I'm really glad you're doing this. The 21st century has brought with it new challenges and therefore put women squarely at the center of conflict, climate change, and of course, COVID-19. The impacts of these crises are never gender neutral, as we all know, and COVID-19 is no exception. So let's look at how the pandemic has threatened to reverse some of these economic and social gains that we have fought so hard for over the years. In Pakistan, the fights for women's rights, as all sisters know, has very often been a pushback against the snuffing out of women's choices, and our supportive men friends also know this, because it has been done both through laws and social constructs that confine and exclude women from exercising full citizenship, let alone choices. Also, it's time now to talk about how women are at the core of the huge care and response efforts that are currently still underway to combat the pandemic. Yet, the same women and many others have emerged as the hidden statistic of shame. Why do I say this? Because it's time to unmask many canards that are airbrushed in the service of commodifying women's rights as simply the right to make choices. Because no, the struggle has to be much more than that. This is International Women's Day, it's 2021, and we have to call a spade a spade. Why, again, do I say this? Because I'm really glad you brought patriarchy into the equation, because it just remains unaddressed these days. And patriarchy, in its neoliberal and traditional structural avatar, has interlocked in dangerous ways with the pandemic to strip women of rights and incomes, to burden them with care, and to hide the scars of violence and abuse they face at home, especially in pandemic isolation. Now, patriarchy in Pakistan, like many other places, is a system of social organization that enforces violent exclusions and mortalities, deaths in many cases. Acid crimes, rapes, honor killings make it to the headlines. But the pandemic has silently colluded with patriarchy to bring back, reinforce, and amplify a dehumanizing era of covert and overt daily discriminations. Now, I'm going to talk about five intersects, one of them, and I'll start with where this intersects. And those are obviously domestic violence, climate stress, access to incomes, access to education, and access to healthcare. But first, I want to say that the epidemic has caused reversals for women that don't make it to the headlines and is likely to further compound pre-existing gender inequalities in many developing countries, including Pakistan, that already don't boast very low, I mean, have very low indicators of socioeconomic development. And what this does is it normalizes burdens on women, which are numerous, from social and cultural ostracization, exclusion, patriarchal norms, which discriminate on the basis of gender, economic and political marginalization, and issues of gender violence, to mention just a few. These are and were all magnified during COVID-19, which is still working its way through South Asia, through the globe, and many parts of, I think, the rest of the developing world as well, including the UK. Women in Pakistan have had to disproportionately bear a threefold increase in their burden of work, having to keep up with increased household work with everyone at home, increased caretaking responsibilities, including COVID patients, because many didn't make it to hospitals, still don't, and the homeschooling of children, which included the learning and management of new technology. Now, let me first come to the big statistic of shame. The spread of the virus has forced domestic violence victims to stay at home with their abusers. And the UN is quite right in saying for once that now women have to battle the male aggressor inside and the virus outside. This is very much a fact. It's a sad fact, but it's a reality we can't walk away from. And the more we talk about it, the more we unmask it, the more we expect society and convening such as this to address the problem. In Pakistan, for instance, 28% of women aged between 15 and 49 have experienced physical violence since the age of 15, and 6% have experienced sexual violence. 7% of the women who have ever been pregnant have experienced violence during their pregnancy, and 34% of women have experienced married women, spousal, physical, sexual, or emotional violence. Before this pandemic began, and statistics were not really gathered during the pandemic, some 90% of women have already experienced some form of physical, emotional, or psychological abuse, mostly from an intimate partner. And these are statistics of shame that I speak about from Pakistan. We hear that it is very likely the same the world over in developed societies, in industrial, post-industrial economies, where women's rights are at a better place and women's social and economic indicators are at a better place. But domestic violence seems to be the prevalent predator and beast everywhere, and it's a common, hideous denominator that brings us all into the one same ambit of a global increase of domestic abuse. As something that we have called quite rightly the shadow pandemic. So this really has been a time of frustration and difficulty and challenge for women everywhere, especially Pakistan. And we fared much worse than many other countries in both the number of cases and response, because state structures had also collapsed and women's domestic abuse helplines fell silent, while police case evidence grew on the ground. And many police, let me assure you, this was the tip of the iceberg. Many cases just went unreported. The mask of fear also prevented women from reporting many cases during this whole pandemic. And this led to the statistics and numbers going down. So really, it is the shadow pandemic, and only one report has come to us from the Aurat Foundation. Aurat stands for Women. Pakistan reported 2,297 cases of violence against women from 25 districts between January and December 2020. So this number is despite the challenge of underreporting, and this data shows that at the peak of the pandemic in July, cases of violence against women were the highest. Now, there's been a surge in abuse as well as the pandemic since then. And as I said, the cautionary remark here that I make is that this is just 25 districts, and from that, this is the tip of the iceberg. So you can just cast your imagination wide at the kind of chilling abuse that women are facing and continue to face during the pandemic. Next intersect that I want to talk about is how this has eroded the economic autonomy of women. That's been a major loss of income because women supplement household incomes, and they always used to make coping with economic stress for median incomes much easier. The crisis caused by COVID-19 has naturally had a huge negative impact on the economic autonomy of women, because it has not only threatened and actually blocked incomes, because women have access to neither their cottage industry providers or dealers, middlemen, or helplines that help them market their products, but also are unable to go to the factories or to the fields where they would acquire their income. So any autonomy or agency women had acquired, and some level of agency was or is always acquired with an income, has kind of disappeared. So this is a huge reversal, and the World Bank also shows us that Pakistan's women-owned micro enterprises, which are usually smaller than their men-owned counterparts, are actually 8% more likely to lose their entire revenue during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, again, this is, women in Pakistan account for only 24% of the formal employment sector in Pakistan. So you're getting a huge case of underreporting here. Women are working both in urban areas as well as rural areas. They run the wheels of the rural economy revolve around women, and they are not mainstreamed as formal economic workers. Then you have domestic workers who make up a large proportion of urban working women who have lost their jobs and because they're better income employers naturally told them to stay away. Itinerant workers, um, other home-based workers. Now you have 12 million home-based workers who earn about 3 to 4,000 rupees a month. It's literally a pittance. Even for a calorific intake, it's nothing. And these women have also faced crises, including the absence of social protections and high economic vulnerability. Many homes with men also losing their jobs have seen large swathes of unemployment, and household costs have risen with spiraling particularly rural inflation in Pakistan. And so the knock-on effects on nutrition and schooling have disproportionately impacted women and girls. And part of the reason I speak about patriarchy, and which deep roots misogyny into the system, is that women are also discouraged from, forget boardrooms, they're discouraged from seeking their place at the meal table. When food is laid out on the ground in rural households and middle income households, even in the urban areas, they're the last to be fed. If there is only so much food at home and only so much nutrition, it goes last to the women. So here you are with impoverishment and nutritional deficits women face disproportionately because of the pandemic. Jobs are lost, and factories are closed, have been closed. It's been difficult all around. Now, access to healthcare. These are not glamorous subjects. They don't talk about personal stories. I believe the large aggregate has to be discussed, and because that masks a vast, literally a wave of suffering that has come across that women have had to endure during this pandemic. And literally, again, UN data, that's been the only some of the data available to us, is that 48.1% of women in Pakistan have no say in their health decisions. And now COVID-19 has also disrupted, of course, it disrupted essential health services for women and children. It also exposed women to the front lines of a global pandemic in a health system where social hierarchies still prioritize men as first recipients of nutrition or healthcare, something I've been talking about quite consistently. And we see that women experience both miscarriages and other health problems because of violence. Then pre and postnatal services were discontinued as community health workers were unable to navigate their usual rounds of call-ons and were naturally reluctant to make field visits. So this cut off a lot of personal protective care for women on the ground. And again, closure of maternity wards impacted thousands of women, which did happen. Those maternity wards were put in the service of COVID fatalities and COVID emergencies. And hospitals had very little option. But clearly, this magnified the impact on women. And reports from field workers, which we have spoken to, reveal that pregnant women were in such distress they could not receive either contraceptive before pregnancy, and they relied on their health and family planning for these women, lady health workers also, which are the backbone of Pakistan's system, primary healthcare system. Now, 5.5 million births are expected in Pakistan over the next year because of the disruption in contraceptive prevalence and use. Right now, again, only 55% of women have access to adequate healthcare, and only 34% have reported consulting a doctor or a medical health professional for health-related issues. So what this does is it made women immobile. It restricted their not just access to healthcare, but even access to the lady health workers and polio immunizers. That's a whole other story, but that too became impacted. And the bizarre part of this is that women were also at the front line of providing healthcare In Pakistan, a large majority of nurses and healthcare workers are all women. So they were at the forefront of identifying and treating healthcare COVID-19 patients also, and were the most to be at risk of exposure to infection. Despite this, I'll have to say that hundreds of lady health workers from across the country were in Islamabad to protest against low salaries, pay structure, and scale. They were clearly feeling the pinch. And I think we needed to be more receptive to building their resilience and their capacity. But here we've seen a completely different response. Um, Thirdly, I wanted to talk very quickly about the access to education. There are 11 million girls that may leave school by the end of the COVID-19 crisis. Evidence from previous crises also suggests that they may not return. And this is a UN statistics. In Pakistan, over 300,000 schools have been closed since March due to the COVID outbreak. Schools are opening slowly, but girls are the last to return to the schools because high dropout rates impact girls more than anybody else, as well as the lack of transport. Uh, 22.8 million of Pakistan's over 70 million children are out of school. I'm sorry to be boring you with statistics, but I think this whole conversation has to be structural. It can't just be about my story or one story or the ability to make choices. We have to break past the walls of privilege and speak about the broad base of the social pyramid where women are facing multiple inequalities and discriminations, and that this lockdown has actually cut a great deal of opportunities, especially girls who lack the internet. Where there was facilities, girls lacked the internet or had to share a device with other family members at home because they would not all, and they wouldn't get, just like at the meal table, they would not be first priority for sharing the device. And therefore they fell back on their homework and online lessons. The mobile gender gap, for instance, reports that Pakistan has the highest mobile internet gap usage of 49%, with 37% Pakistani males against 19% females having access to mobile internet facilities. So, in the age of digital living and existence, women and girls have had the least access and therefore been affected disproportionately to both outside help as well as access to education. Lastly, I want to talk about climate change, which as a global crisis has impacted women across the world. And there's been a great public conversation about it by younger women, there's Greta Thunberg and others. But women living in Pakistan have not been able to give voice to what they face, especially in rural areas where they're close to nature and are just natural, should I say, recyclers, are just natural carbon reducers. That's just the way women function all over the world because they're closer to the earth and they tend to need it to regenerate and reproduce. And in Pakistan, again, for instance, when rivers flood rural villages, it is women who are at the forefront of the crisis, and that's been happening. Over 70% of these women were displaced in Pakistan. They were women and children. And the boundaries between private and public have started to blur because of the climate crisis we find ourselves in. Who gathers firewood? Who gathers water? All natural resources are husbanded and harvested. Ironic that it's called husbanded, but harvested and husbanded by women now. And really, according to the UNICEF, which looks at the well-being of families and how women are the caregivers, globally, women and girls spend 200 million hours, or 22,800 years every single day collecting water. Women are collecting water everywhere. But in Pakistan, which is likely to become completely water scarce by 2025, not in some distant future, which has aquifers and riverbeds depleting fast, and which is not monsoon dependent but glacier dependent for our river systems, is facing that depletion. Who is affected most in COVID, in climate stress, brought together, magnified together, are women. So they are actually on every front line of every intersect with climate change and have to scramble to make sure that their families are shielded. And really, we have upon us a task where we must build policies to navigate such change. And first of all, create a public conversation that includes the bottom of the pyramid. Women at the bottom of the pyramid are not able to bring their voices to the table. They are very far from having an ability to make choices on what they eat, on how they conserve their incomes, if at all they get access to any, and where they go from there. So I think policies must be about taking responsibility above all, and they must share, they must allow for women to build in their voices. I think right now, Sindh has produced a report. I have not seen one from any other province that is called a gender responsive policy report. I would urge everyone to look at it. And it has highlighted and marked out through its consultations with Shirkat Ga and other organizations, women's organizations, on how best to build both helplines, care shelters for abuse, but also how to build resilience across the board for women during such national and global emergencies. One of the things I think very important recommendations is to include GBV, global gender-based violence, response services and mechanisms in essential services. Essential services are what provinces and federations define as important services that keep functioning during calamities and emergencies. So essential services are crucial. The whole and everybody was running to be defined as to be included in essential services. And while many caregivers were, what we saw was that GBV mechanisms were not. And I think we have to push for that kind of inclusion. Reproductive health services have to have better clarity in their protocols and SOPs for each level of health provider, in particular lady health workers, midwives, nurses, doctors, and they need a COVID-19 education and PPE provision for all of them, including community-based workers in the immediate term. And for the longer term, I think we have to consider possible emergency situations which arise literally every monsoon season, which is around July, such as floods, and devise appropriate strategies and disaster preparedness beforehand. Um, Safety and care protocols for trans women also have to be provided and defined. We have to expand the capacity of shelters. There are very few. In fact, they shut down during COVID-19. And we also have to look towards building our helpline services and making sure they're manned or womaned during emergencies. If they can be toll-free, that would be even better to avoid costs to survivors and victims. For building economic resilience, we have to look towards ensuring that the informal economy is documented and regularized. I think Sindh is working again towards doing that. There is a Sindh Women Agriculturers Workers Act of 2019, which has formalized the role of women in the field and lays the groundwork for equal pay, minimum wage, and working hours, as well as prevention from harassment and discrimination. Now, it's important to have a law on the ground. While there may be gaps in implementation like there are all over Pakistan, it's important to have a law on the ground. Just like it's important to have a domestic violence law on the ground, which I've been trying for 7 years to move at the federal level. My bill is right now sitting in the Senate while we go through a Senate election. It's been 7 years. Some provinces, including Sindh and Punjab, have actually brought together those, implemented those. But again, there are egregious gaps. Again, the law has to be on the ground. Another model law which I would urge all provinces to adopt is the Sindh Home-Based Workers Act, which seeks to formalize the status of home-based workers who live on the front lines of serial fragility, to offer them social and legal protection, as they can be exploited and abused by both employers and contractors. And we have several horror stories in the media. And then there are calls for, terrible penalties, which don't really prevent anything. What we need to do is build in preventive mechanisms and better protections. Obviously, social protections are needed. For that, the Benazir Income Support Program needs an enhancement. It's now called SRs, but for donors, it remains the Benazir Income Support Program, and we hope that it will have numbers added to it, because we've seen a high level of impoverishment over COVID occur for women over the years. And as you know, the BISP is targeted at women householders. We do have to create a law, I believe, at all levels on equal pay for factory and other workers. That is one thing we have not addressed as parliamentarians, and I think we need to do that. Also, we need to roll out for education, we have to roll out regular teacher training in how to use new tech to conduct lessons and assessments. I think that's something that we will all have to play catch up on. And girls will need remedial classes, as will boys, but especially girls over the summer vacations in 2021 to make up learning losses, because as I said, girls endured the most learning losses. And we do need to identify specific areas where targeted incentivization and programming is required for sending girls to school where they have been made to drop out, where if a family is impoverished, the girls are put to work in the home and outside the home. So I think these are the things we need to address. Another piece of good news, well, the big piece of good news on the legislative front is really from Lahore High Court. It comes from a woman judge called Aisha Malik, who has actually, debunked the humiliating two-finger test, which has been catted for rape, for virginity, which has been debunked by the WHO, saying that it has no scientific merit and is a human rights violation. So we have a woman judge really put an end to it, and it is important to outlaw it for when victims report rape. And in this particular context, I'd like to mention the Mukhtara Mai case, which 10 years ago the Supreme Court ruled against. They did not give her any justice because she was a married woman, and also therefore her virginity could be tested or could not be tested. So she stands at least morally vindicated by Judge Aisha Malik's ruling. Because the Mukhtara Mai case was one that shamed us and shook us all to the core. It was a terrible case of gang rape with an even more chilling backstory of families exchanging, penalties, horrible penalties of abuse, and privatizing justice, which we have all worked so very hard to work against. But this kind of story, the laws that have been made, the people speaking out, opportunities for at least convening across the digital space have been, I think, rays of hope in this very dark time. And I do want to thank once again the WOW Foundation and the British Council for always allowing on creating the space proactively for women, both globally and in Pakistan, across the board, across the class divide, to speak about what really matters on the ground. I hope that International Women's Day will be more than just celebrating our achievements of women who've cut through the intense patriarchy, the hierarchy of patriarchy that we face, the architecture of patriarchy that we face across the class divide, but that it discusses important structural changes that must not be put behind us, and how we must keep building bridges towards change and keeping our fists up in the air towards that. So to all the women and all the men who support this, who support women's rights and International Women's Day, thank you once again for doing this, and stay strong in solidarity.